Poor woman helped a man walking in the rain. The next day, she discovers he's the Mafia boss. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain fell hard over New York that Tuesday, turning the streets into dark rivers that reflected the city lights. Amelia Rose adjusted her tired hands on the steering wheel of the old yellow Ford Econoline, her blue eyes fixed on the wet road ahead. It was almost 11 at night, and her body ached from scrubbing floors, cleaning bathrooms, and enduring the disdainful looks of the office workers where she was employed. The same van that took her home every day was a joke among them, as if driving a 1985 vehicle were a greater crime than the cruelty with which they treated anyone they considered inferior. The smell of cleaning products still clung to her simple clothes, mingling with the cheap perfume she used to try to mask the hours of hard labor. Her hands, even protected by gloves during her shift, were rough and reddish. Amelia glanced at them briefly while waiting at a red light, thinking how different they were from the manicured hands of the female executives who worked on the upper floors. Those women would never know what it was like to scrub the floor on your knees, to empty trash cans full of the expensive food they wasted without a second thought. But Amelia had learned long ago to hold her head high in the face of humiliation. Her Irish grandmother, who had come from Ireland with nothing but dreams and a mended suitcase, had taught her that dignity can't be bought with money. The same delicate features she had inherited from that strong woman were now marked by exhaustion, but her eyes kept that glint of someone who refuses to be broken. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell, of how she had crossed half the world on overcrowded ships, sleeping in cramped bunks with dozens of other women also seeking a better life. Her grandmother always said that poverty was temporary, but a lack of character was eternal. The Brooklyn Queens Expressway was practically empty when she spotted the solitary figure walking in the rain. Even from a distance and through the fogged-up windshield, it was impossible not to notice the man's magnetic presence. Tall, dark-haired, with broad shoulders that moved with an innate confidence despite the punishing rain. There was something wild about him, an intensity that made Amelia's heart race without her understanding why. The way he moved, even injured, had a feline, predatory quality. Each step was calculated, even in the apparent urgency of the situation. It was then that she saw the headlights. Two black cars appearing on the road, their speed too dangerous to be a coincidence. The roar of the engines cut through the night, like the growl of beasts closing in on wounded prey. Her instinct screamed danger, and before she could think about the consequences, Amelia slammed on the brakes. The van skidded slightly on the wet pavement, the old tires protesting the abrupt maneuver. She rolled down the window and yelled, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Get in! Quick!" The man turned his face toward her, and Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. Even injured, even soaked, and visibly in danger, he was devastatingly handsome. Dark eyes that seemed to see right through her, an angular face marked by a life she could hardly imagine, tattoos extending down muscular arms, now plastered to his body by the rain. There were scars, blood trickling from a cut on his temple, but also a brutal beauty that left her speechless. For an instant that seemed to last an eternity, their eyes met through the rain and the distance, and Amelia felt something shift in the air, an inexplicable connection that frightened and attracted her at the same time. He hesitated for only a second before running to the van. The passenger seat groaned under his weight as he threw himself inside, bringing with him the smell of rain, blood, and a raw masculinity that made every cell in Amelia's body awaken. It was a complex, almost intoxicating scent, a mixture of expensive cologne, sweat, danger, and something indefinable that made her stomach churn in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Her fingers trembled on the steering wheel, and she had to make a conscious effort not to let him see the effect his presence had on her. "Drive," he ordered, his voice hoarse and authoritative even amidst the danger. Amelia didn't need to be told twice. She floored the accelerator, and the old van picked up speed, her skilled hands navigating the few deserted streets with an expertise that surprised even the man beside her. She knew every street, every shortcut in this city that both suffocated and embraced her. Years of driving an informal taxi at night after her cleaning job had given her an intimate knowledge of the urban geography that was now saving both their lives. The headlights of their pursuers appeared and disappeared in the rearview mirror as she maneuvered through alleys and side avenues, her heart hammering against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Adrenaline coursed through Amelia's veins as she made the van dance through the wet city. She turned left onto a narrow street, then right into an alley that barely accommodated the vehicle's width, scraping dangerously close to the graffiti-stained concrete walls. The man beside her held onto the seat with one hand, the other pressed against a wound in his abdomen that she was only now noticing, the blood further darkening the black shirt he wore. "Who are you?" he asked after long minutes, when they finally seemed to have lost the cars. "Someone who doesn't ask questions," Amelia replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. She felt his gaze on her, heavy and piercing. It was as if those dark eyes could undress not just her body, but her soul. He studied her with an intensity that bordered on uncomfortable, noticing details she knew revealed too much. The cheap but clean clothes, the hands calloused from work, the old but well-maintained van. A shiver ran down her spine, and it wasn't just from the cold rain coming in through the slightly open window. It was something much more primitive, much more dangerous. "Where are we going?" he wanted to know, his voice a softer tone now, revealing a subtle Italian accent she hadn't noticed before. "My place. You're hurt and you need help. You don't know who I am. No, and you don't know who I am. We're even." A tense silence filled the van's interior. Amelia could feel his intensity, the way every muscle in his body was alert despite his injuries. Danger emanated from him like heat, but there was also a vulnerability she couldn't ignore. His breathing was getting heavier, more irregular, and she knew he was losing too much blood. She sped up, taking risks she would normally avoid. When she finally parked in front of her simple house in Queens, he was almost unconscious, his large, heavy body slumping against her. With great effort, Amelia managed to help him inside. The house was small, clean, despite the evident poverty, with old but well-cared-for furniture. Framed photos on the walls showed generations of her family, proud Irish faces looking toward the future with hope. She took him to her room, the only one in the place, and laid him on the narrow bed that suddenly seemed tiny under his body. Her hands trembled as she removed his blood-soaked shirt, revealing a sculpted chest covered in more tattoos and scars that told stories of violence she preferred not to know. The tattoos were complex works of art, not the crude drawings done in prison that she sometimes saw in the neighborhood. An Italian dragon coiled around his right shoulder, its scales detailed in black and gray. Words in Italian decorated his ribs, a phrase she couldn't fully read because of the blood. Every mark on his skin was a page from a book Amelia didn't know if she wanted to read, but which fascinated her nonetheless. She worked for hours, cleaning wounds, making makeshift bandages with what she had at home. Every touch on his warm skin was a sweet torture. Every low groan that escaped his unconscious lips made her heart race. The forced intimacy of the situation made her dizzy, too aware of the proximity of that male body, of the tanned skin under her hands, of the muscles that contracted involuntarily when she touched more sensitive areas. When she finally finished, it was past 3 in the morning, and Amelia was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She sat in the chair beside the bed, watching his face relaxed in sleep, the long, dark eyelashes, the strong line of his jaw covered by stubble. In his sleep he seemed less dangerous, almost vulnerable. The lines of tension that marked his awake face softened, revealing a beauty that went beyond the purely physical. Amelia found herself wondering what kind of life this man had led. What choices had brought him to this rainy night, bleeding and fleeing from unknown enemies? She knew she should be afraid, that any sensible person would have left an injured stranger in the hands of the police or a hospital. But something in her, perhaps the same stubbornness that had brought her grandmother across oceans, refused to abandon him. She fell asleep without realizing it, and when she woke up, it was with the feeling of being watched. She opened her eyes and met that intense gaze fixed on her. Now fully conscious and alert, Amelia's heart took off, beating erratically inside her chest. "You saved me," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Anyone would have done the same. No, they wouldn't have. He sat up in bed slowly, wincing in pain he couldn't completely hide. "You don't know what you've done, the danger you've put yourself in. Then tell me, Leo Falcone, does that name mean anything to you?" Amelia felt the blood run cold in her veins. Everyone in New York knew that name, even those who lived in the outer boroughs like her. Rumors, whispered stories about the head of one of the city's most powerful criminal organizations. A man feared, respected, and hated in equal measure. They said he controlled entire territories, that important politicians were on his payroll, that his enemies simply disappeared without a trace, and she had brought him into her home, cared for him, touched his skin as if he were just an injured man. The innocence of her actions over the last few hours suddenly seemed like a monumental stupidity. "You should have left me on the street," Leo said, his voice laced with something that might have been regret. "Probably, but I didn't." "Why?" Amelia faced him, her blue eyes meeting his dark ones without fear. "Because I saw a man who needed help. I didn't see a name or a reputation." Something in his expression changed. For a moment, the mask of hardness fell away, and Amelia saw something that surprised her. Raw, pure vulnerability. Leo watched her as if she were a mythical creature, something impossible to exist in his world. She saw astonishment in those dark eyes, as if he couldn't believe someone would see him as just human, not as a monster or a tool of power. "What's your name?" he asked softly, and there was a gentleness in his voice that completely contrasted with the brutal image his name evoked. "Amelia. Amelia Rose. Amelia." He tested the name on his tongue, making it sound like a caress, each syllable pronounced with almost reverent care. "You have no idea what you've done, Amelia, nor the danger you're in now." "Then protect me," she said before she could stop herself, the words escaping her lips before her rational mind could censor them. His gaze intensified, burning through her with an intensity that made the air seem thinner. It was both a promise and a threat, charged with a desire that made Amelia's stomach flip. Leo got up from the bed, moving with the grace of a predator despite his injuries, and walked toward her. He was much taller, much more imposing up close. His scent, even after the rain and blood, was intoxicating, masculine, and dangerous. Amelia had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, aware of how he dominated the small space of the room, making the walls seem to close in around them. "If I protect you," Leo murmured, his voice dropping an octave, "you become my responsibility, part of my world. There's no coming back from that. Maybe I don't want to come back." The words came out before Amelia could filter them, honest and raw. She saw his jaw clench, his eyes darken further with something primitive and hungry. For an eternal moment she thought he was going to kiss her. The air between them was charged, electric, each breath a battle of restraint. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the accelerated pulse in the vein of his neck. But then Leo pulled back, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that revealed frustration and internal conflict. "You don't know what you're saying. I have to go. I have to make sure they haven't found you." But he would be back. Amelia knew it, with a certainty she couldn't explain. In the days that followed, Amelia discovered that escaping Leo Falcone was impossible. He had men watching her house, her van, every move she made. At first she felt suffocated by their invisible presence, eyes she felt but couldn't see, shadows that followed her at a respectful but constant distance. But then she understood. It was protection. Leo's enemies had seen the yellow van that night. She was a witness, a potential target, a vulnerability that cruel men wouldn't hesitate to exploit. When he appeared at her door again, it was with a proposal that sounded absurd. A job as his personal assistant, a generous salary, a secure apartment if she wanted one. Amelia knew it was a pretext, an excuse to keep her close, watched and protected. She should have refused, should have run in the opposite direction of a man whose hands were stained with blood. But she accepted. She accepted because she saw something in him that no one else seemed to see. Behind the brutal reputation, there was a man who treated his employees with respect, who genuinely cared for the people under his protection, who carried the weight of impossible decisions on his broad shoulders. Leo was a product of a world that had shaped him for violence, but he wasn't just that. She saw the way he spoke to the elderly woman who cleaned his office, always gentle, always respectful. She saw how he ensured his men's children had a quality education, paying for private schools out of his own pocket. She saw the complexity that existed beyond the label of a criminal. The days turned into weeks, and the tension between them became almost unbearable. In the discreet office from which Leo commanded his legal and illegal businesses, Amelia learned quickly. She discovered she had a knack for organization, for dealing with numbers and contracts. Her mind, sharpened by years of having to make every penny count, absorbed information about import-export, real estate investments. She also discovered that every time their hands accidentally touched, every time he leaned over her desk to look at something on the computer, bringing with him that masculine scent that made her dizzy, her entire body vibrated with desire. Leo fought his own feelings with a ferocity she could see. During the meals they shared in discreet restaurants, away from prying eyes, he allowed himself to relax a little. He told stories of his childhood, of how his Sicilian father had built an empire by mixing legal and illegal businesses, of how he had inherited not only the fortune, but also the wars and the enemies. He spoke of Isabella, his younger sister, whom he fiercely protected from the truth about his activities, keeping her in a world of illusions where he was just a successful businessman. The pain in his voice when he mentioned the weight of maintaining that charade was palpable. Amelia, in turn, opened her heart in a way she never had with anyone. She spoke of the grandmother who had crossed oceans for a better life, of the grandfather who had bought the yellow van with years of savings and left it to her as an inheritance, a symbol of dignity and freedom. She spoke of the isolation of growing up too beautiful for her reality, but too poor for the world her beauty suggested she belonged to, of how men desired her but never respected her, of how women envied her and treated her with cruelty. Leo listened to her with an intensity that left her bare, vulnerable, asking questions that showed genuine interest, not just physical attraction. It was on one of those nights, after dinner at an Italian restaurant hidden in an old neighborhood, that he took her home and finally crossed the line they had both been avoiding. At her front door, under the dim light of a flickering streetlight, Leo held Amelia's face between his large, calloused hands. "I shouldn't do this," he murmured, his eyes fixed on her lips, the internal conflict evident in the tension of his body. "You deserve someone better, someone clean." "I don't want someone better. Amelia whispered back, her hands climbing up his chest, feeling the tense muscles under the expensive shirt. "I want you." The kiss was devastating. Leo kissed her like a starving man, as if she were air and he was drowning. His hands were rough and gentle at the same time, holding her with a possessive intensity, but touching her as if she were made of crystal. Amelia melted against him, every nerve ending on fire, her body responding in ways she didn't even know were possible. He pressed her against the door, his solid body glued to hers, and she felt every inch of him, the contained strength, the desire he had fought so hard to suppress. When they finally separated, they were both breathless, their ragged breaths mingling in the minimal space between them. Leo rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, as if trying to memorize that moment. "If I take you, I won't be able to let you go," he warned, his voice hoarse with desire and something deeper, more frightening. "Then don't let me go." That night, Leo made love to her, as if he were memorizing every curve, every moan, every sigh. It was intense and overwhelming, filled with a passion that was frightening in its strength. He touched her as if she were sacred and sinful at the same time, awakening sensations Amelia had never experienced. In his arms, she felt truly seen for the first time, truly desired not just for her beauty, but for who she was. And when they finally climaxed together, she whispered his name like a prayer, and he swore eternal protection against her sweaty skin. But their happiness was fragile, built on foundations of danger and secrets. The storm arrived in the form of Isabella Falcone, who returned from London and immediately noticed the change in her brother. Tall, elegant, with the same dark hair and piercing eyes as Leo, Isabella was everything Amelia was not. Educated in European schools, a master's degree in law, connections with the New York elite. She wore designer suits like armor, spoke 3 languages fluently, and moved in the highest social circles with the grace of someone born to it. And she hated Amelia on sight. Not with the open cruelty of Amelia's co-workers, but with the venomous subtlety of one born with a silver spoon in her mouth. Comments about clothes, about table manners, about the humble origins Amelia couldn't hide. Isabella planted seeds of insecurity with mastery, making her question if she really had a place beside Leo. At family dinners, she would correct the way Amelia held her silverware. At social events, she would introduce her to people with an exaggerated emphasis on her past as a cleaner, turning Amelia's honesty into a weapon against her. "You don't understand what it means to be part of this family," Isabella said one day. When they were alone on the terrace of Leo's penthouse, the city stretching out below them like a tapestry of lights. "Leo might have his amusements, but in the end, he'll need someone who understands our world, someone who won't embarrass him." The words hurt more than Amelia wanted to admit. She saw the truth in them when she looked around at the luxury that surrounded Leo, at the world of power and influence in which he operated. At social events, when Leo took her as his date, the disdainful looks were evident. A cleaner from the outer boroughs on the arm of Leo Falcone, what a joke. Even though he had bought her expensive clothes, even though he treated her like a queen, Amelia felt like an imposter. The designer dresses didn't change her calloused hands. The Louboutin shoes didn't erase the neighborhood accent that slipped out when she got emotional. Leo noticed her internal conflict, and it made him furious. In a heated argument, after a particularly humiliating event where Amelia was treated like a prostitute by some of the guests who whispered just loud enough for her to hear, he pressed her against the wall of his apartment, his eyes burning with rage. "I don't care what they think," he growled, his hands holding her face with a force that bordered on painful but didn't cross the line. "I don't care what my sister thinks. You are mine, and nothing is going to change that." But Amelia was tired of being defended. She wanted to defend herself, to prove her worth not just to others, but to herself. She started studying at night, taking online courses in business administration and management, reading books on social etiquette and art history. Leo offered to pay for a private university, but she refused. She needed to achieve this with her own two hands, so they couldn't say that everything she had came from him. While they fought against social prejudice, a much greater danger was forming in the shadows. Victor Gallo, a former partner of Leo's who had been expelled from the organization for betrayal 2 years earlier, had been planning his revenge for months. A cruel and unscrupulous man, Victor understood that destroying Leo meant not just killing him, but taking away everything he loved. And now Leo loved Amelia. That was obvious to anyone who knew where to look. Victor's men began to investigate, digging deep into her past. They followed her for weeks, photographed every move, every place she visited. That's how they discovered the secrets buried about her family, truths that Amelia herself didn't know. Her grandfather, the kind man she loved so much, had been a police informant in the 80s, denouncing fellow workers involved with criminal groups. Some of those denunciations led to deaths, destroyed families, children growing up without fathers. When Victor presented the evidence to Amelia, in a forced meeting where she was lured under false pretenses, the floor disappeared from under her feet, yellowed photographs, official documents with her grandfather's signature, everything proving that the grandfather she idolized had blood on his hands, even if indirectly. Victor watched with sadistic pleasure as her world crumbled, savoring every tear that ran down her face. "You have a choice," Victor said, smiling cruelly as he arranged the compromising documents on the table between them. "You turn Leo over to the authorities, provide evidence of his illegal activities, and I destroy these documents. No one will ever know your family has such a dirty past, or I go public with this and destroy the memory of your precious grandfather." Amelia felt nausea rise in her throat. Betraying Leo was unthinkable, but protecting him meant letting the truth about her grandfather come out, staining the only pure memory she had of her family. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably, her breath becoming difficult in her tight chest. "How much time do I have?" she asked, her voice broken and almost unrecognizable. 3 days. After that, I'll assume you've chosen to protect your criminal lover, and the world will know that the informant's granddaughter is sleeping with the king of crime. The irony is delicious, don't you think? Amelia left there destroyed, her legs barely able to support her. She couldn't tell Leo, not yet. He would send men to kill Victor, and that would only escalate the war, putting more people in danger. She needed to think, to find a way out. But how could she balance love and loyalty when they pulled in opposite directions? The situation worsened when Leo's men, already suspicious of her influence over their boss, began to question his orders. Leo had been different since he got involved with Amelia. More considerate, less impulsive. Some saw this as weakness. Murmurs of discontent spread through the organization like wildfire. In a tense meeting with his top lieutenants, one of them had the audacity to say what everyone was thinking. "You're getting soft. Leo, that woman is making you weak. If you can't control a cleaner from the outer boroughs, how are you going to lead us?" The silence that followed was deadly. Leo rose slowly, his dark eyes promising a violence that made even the most experienced men back away. In a movement too fast to follow, he had the man pressed against the wall, a knife to his throat, the tip pressing just enough to draw a thin line of blood. "Talk about her again," Leo hissed, each word dripping with threat, "and I'll rip out your tongue and make you swallow it. Understand?" The man nodded frantically, and Leo released him, throwing him to the floor like disposable trash. But the damage was done. The crack in his leadership was exposed, a vulnerability that enemies would not hesitate to exploit. Amelia found out about the incident through whispers among the security guards who didn't notice her presence. She felt guilty, a burden Leo didn't need. When she confronted him that night, in his luxurious Soho penthouse where she now spent most of her time, She was determined to put an end to it. "Maybe they're right," she said, hugging herself defensively as she looked out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Maybe I am making you weak." Leo crossed the room in long strides and pulled her to him with a force that stole the air from her lungs. "You make me human, Amelia, not weak, human. And if they don't understand the difference, they don't deserve to follow me." He kissed her with a desperate intensity, as if trying to prove something to both her and himself. They made love right there, on the cold marble floor of the living room, with an urgency that bordered on violence. It was sex charged with emotion, each touch a declaration, each moan a promise. Afterwards, lying entangled as their breathing normalized and the sweat cooled on their skin, Amelia almost told him about Victor, almost revealed the poison that was eating away at her soul, but she couldn't. The words died in her throat, trapped by fear and confusion. The betrayal came from where she least expected it. It was Isabella, in a seemingly casual conversation with Victor at a social event where they both circulated, who unintentionally mentioned Amelia's schedules, the courses she attended, the routine she kept. She didn't know she was setting up an ambush, didn't know Victor's intentions, but it was enough. Amelia was kidnapped in broad daylight as she was leaving one of the courses she attended. Hooded men threw her into a black van before she could scream, a large hand muffling her cries. When she woke up, she was in an abandoned warehouse tied to a metal chair, the smell of mold and rancid oil making her stomach turn. Victor was there, smiling that cruel smile that made her blood run cold. "Time's up," he said, circling her like a predator circling its prey. "And since you didn't make your choice, I made it for you." Leo received the news via a video sent to his phone. Amelia, bruised but alive, blood trickling from a cut on her lip, with Victor holding a gun to her head. The demands were simple. Leo was to hand over control of 3 key territories, plus half of his legal businesses, or he would watch the woman he loved die. What followed was a transformation no one around Leo expected. Instead of the explosive fury everyone anticipated, he became ice, calculating, methodical, every move thought out with surgical precision. He summoned not only his own men, but also allies from other factions, offering deals and alliances he would never consider under normal circumstances. He promised future favors, ceded smaller territories to gain support, moved pieces on the board with the expertise of a grandmaster chess player. When he finally attacked Victor's hideout, it was with the force of a small army. The battle was brutal, bloody, men dying on both sides in explosions of violence that seemed endless. But Leo fought like a man possessed, cutting a path through enemies with a supernatural determination. Every blow was precise, every move calculated to bring him closer to his goal. He found Amelia still tied up, bruised but alive, and the sight of her like that, vulnerable and hurt, awoke in him a fury that scared even his own men. Victor tried to use Amelia as a shield, the gun pressed against her temple hard enough to leave a mark. But she, remembering everything her grandmother had taught her about strength and courage, did something unexpected. She threw herself backward with all her strength, using her own weight to unbalance Victor just enough for Leo to get the opening he needed. What happened next, Amelia preferred not to see. She closed her eyes as she listened to the sounds of violence, of revenge being carried out with a brutality she didn't want to witness. When Leo came back to her, there was blood on his clothes, his hands, his face. His dark eyes were void of any humanity, transformed into bottomless pits of rage and violence. But when he looked at Amelia, when he touched her with trembling hands that left red streaks on her skin, humanity gradually returned, like a slow light chasing away the darkness. "I'm sorry," he whispered, cutting the ropes that bound her with urgent movements. "I'm sorry for putting you in this situation. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better." Amelia hugged him tightly, ignoring the pain in her bruised muscles, feeling him tremble against her. This brutal, feared man was trembling in her arms like a frightened child. In the days that followed, as Amelia recovered from her injuries in a private hospital where Leo ensured she had the best possible treatment, the truth finally came out. Leo found out about Victor's blackmail, about her grandfather's documents, but instead of the reaction Amelia feared, he simply held her hands in his, careful with the bruises that marked her wrists. "We all have complicated pasts," he said softly, kissing her fingers one by one. "Your grandfather did what he thought was right at the time. Who am I to judge him? My hands have much more blood on them. It was the decisive moment." Amelia realized that Leo loved her, not despite her imperfections, but including them. And she loved him the same way, knowing the darkness that inhabited his soul, but also seeing the light she could ignite in him. The decision came naturally. Leo announced to his lieutenants that he would begin to gradually divest from the illegal businesses. There would be resistance, perhaps even betrayal, but he was determined. Amelia had shown him that there was another way to live, another possible path beyond the violence that had defined his existence until then. It didn't happen overnight. It took months, almost a year of delicate negotiations, of deals with authorities, willing to turn a blind eye in exchange for information on larger organizations. Leo used his intelligence and resources to build an exclusively legal empire, investing in businesses that were once just fronts. He expanded his import-export operations, invested heavily in real estate, created a network of restaurants and hotels that quickly became profitable. During this time, they faced every obstacle together. Isabella, confronted with the truth about her brother's activities, had to choose between her family and her principles. She chose family, but on the condition that Leo truly changed. Slowly, she began to accept Amelia, realizing that the woman's strength came from places money couldn't buy. On a rainy afternoon, Isabella finally apologized, tears streaming down her face, admitting that her prejudice had blinded her to Amelia's genuine goodness. Amelia, for her part, completed her studies and became an integral part of Leo's legal businesses. She discovered a natural talent for management and negotiation, an ability to read people and situations that impressed even experienced investors. She was no longer just the cleaner from the outer boroughs, no longer just the boss's girlfriend. She was his partner in every sense of the word, respected for her own merit, feared for her sharp intelligence. The society that once judged them still whispered, but with less venom. Their story was undeniable, romantic even to the most skeptical, the woman who saved the crime king and brought him back to the light, the man who abandoned an empire of blood for love. On a rainy night, almost 2 years after that first encounter, Leo took Amelia back to the BQE. They stopped at the exact spot where she had picked him up on that fateful Tuesday, the same rain falling like a blessing from the sky. "If I could go back in time," Leo said, holding her hands in his, "I would do it all over again. Every mistake, every moment of pain, because they all led me to you." Amelia smiled through the tears that began to fall, mingling with the rain on her face. "You taught me that I deserved more. I deserve to be loved for who I am, not for what I can offer. And you taught me that there is still good in the world, that I don't have to be the monster they shape me to be." He knelt there, in the rain that was starting to fall harder, like an echo of that first night, and took a velvet box from his pocket. The ring was simple but perfect, without the ostentation the old Leo would have chosen. A white gold band with a single diamond that captured the light from the street lamps. "Marry me, Amelia. Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that men like me can change. That love can be stronger than any legacy of violence." "Yes," she answered without hesitation, pulling him up and kissing him under the rain that baptized them again, symbolically washing away the sins of the past. The wedding was small, intimate, with only the people who truly mattered. Amelia wore a simple dress that reminded her of her grandmother, Leo, a discreet suit. Isabella was the maid of honor, having finally made peace with her sister-in-law. There was no ostentation, no hundreds of guests to impress. It was just them, celebrating a love that had survived storms that would have destroyed anyone else. The old yellow Ford Econoline had a place of honor in the garage of their new home, not the penthouse in Soho, but a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood. Leo refused to sell it or throw it away. It was part of their story, the vehicle that had saved his life and changed his destiny. Sometimes he would spend hours in the garage just looking at the van, remembering what it was like to be lost and to be found. On the nights when the demons of the past returned to haunt him, when Leo woke up sweating from nightmares of choices he couldn't undo, of the faces of men he had killed, Amelia was there. She held him, reminded him that the man he was now mattered more than the man he had been. On the mornings when Amelia doubted her own worth, when the cruel voices of society echoed in her mind, Leo would make her look in the mirror. "See this woman," he would say, his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to face her own reflection. "She is strong. She is brilliant. She is worthy of every good thing the world has to offer, and she is mine." Together, they built not just a successful business, but a home, a place where their past did not define their future, where mistakes could be redeemed through love and better choices. Leo would never be completely clean. There would always be stains that no soap could erase, ghosts that would never leave him completely in peace. But he had become a better, more complete man, capable of loving and being loved. Amelia would never forget where she came from. She regularly returned to her old neighborhood in Queens, helping women in situations similar to the one she had lived through. She created job training programs, offered opportunities to those society had discarded. It was her way of giving back, of honoring the memory of the grandmother who had crossed oceans in search of a better life. Every woman she helped was a small victory against the injustice she had known so intimately. And when Amelia finally became pregnant, when she held the positive test in her trembling hands in the silent bathroom, she found Leo in their office. He was reviewing contracts, reading glasses perched on his nose, so different from the dangerous man she had met in the rain years ago. He looked younger now, despite the time that had passed, as if letting go of the violence had freed him from an invisible weight. "We're going to be parents," she said simply, her voice trembling with emotion. Leo looked up from the papers and for a moment just stared at her, processing the words. Then he stood up, knocking over his chair in his haste, walked over to her and fell to his knees, pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "I'll be better," he promised, his voice muffled against the fabric of her dress. "For you and for our child, I will be the man you deserve." "You already are," Amelia whispered, her fingers running through his dark hair with infinite tenderness. The rain continued to fall outside, as it always did in New York. But now it was just rain, no longer a harbinger of storms or violent changes. It was just rain, washing the streets, nourishing the city, part of the natural cycle of life. At the office window, embraced as they watched the city stretch out before them in its organized chaos, Leo and Amelia were living proof that love could transcend class differences, that people could change when they found the right reasons, that storms eventually pass, leaving clearer skies. She was the rain that had extinguished the destructive fire consuming Leo. He was the fire that had warmed Amelia's cold, lonely existence. Together they found a balance, the exact temperature where they could both not just survive but thrive. Years later, when they told their story to their son, they would tell the truth. That true love wasn't perfect, wasn't easy, didn't magically solve all problems, but it was real. And when it was real, when it was built on a foundation of mutual respect and conscious choices to be better for each other, It could overcome any obstacle. Amelia never regretted stopping the van on that rainy night. Leo never regretted trusting the blue-eyed stranger who saved him when he needed it most. Every scar, every tear, every moment of pain had been worth it because it had brought them here, to this moment of peace and completeness. New York society eventually got tired of judging them. There were always new scandals to feed the gossip, new, unlikely relationships to dissect. Leo and Amelia became just another couple, building a life together, facing challenges like anyone else. But they knew the truth. They knew their story was special, not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs, marked by brave choices, by a love that refused to follow social rules, by two people who found in each other exactly what they needed. When the rain met the fire, no one bet it would result in anything but destruction. But they proved that opposite elements can create not chaos, but harmony, that differences can be bridges instead of walls, that true love knows no boundaries of class, past, or social expectations. And in the quiet of their nights, when the world was asleep and it was just the two of them, Leo held Amelia as if she were the greatest treasure in the world, because she was. She had saved not only his life on that rainy night, but his soul as well. She had given him a reason to want to be better, to build a legacy he could be proud of instead of hiding. Amelia, nestled in his arms, felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. She had found not just love, but a true partnership. Someone who saw her in all her complexity and loved her not in spite of it, but because of it. The old yellow van remained in the garage as a constant reminder of where they began. Sometimes, on special anniversaries, Leo would take her for a drive through the streets where they met. They would retrace the path of that first night, remembering how fragile and scared they were, each for different reasons. And they always ended up in the same place, in front of the house in Queens, where Amelia had taken him when he needed it most. The house was now a community center, transformed by them into a space to help people at risk. It was a way to honor where it all began, to give back to the community that had shaped Amelia. Their individual stories were of struggle and survival, but together they wrote a new narrative, one of redemption and hope. They proved that no matter how dark the past, there is always the possibility of a brighter future when you have the courage to reach for it. Amelia and Leo were not a fairy tale. They were real, imperfect, carrying heavy baggage. But they were also proof that love can be a transformative force, that people can change when they find the right reasons, that life always offers second chances to those who have the courage to seize them. And when the rain fell on New York, as it always did, they remembered. They remembered how they met in the middle of the storm, two lost souls who found their way in each other. The rain was no longer an omen of danger or violent change. It was just rain, a part of life, necessary for new things to grow, just as their love had grown. From the ashes of lives that seemed destined for tragedy, something beautiful and lasting blossomed. A love that defied expectations, that survived literal and metaphorical storms, that grew stronger with every obstacle overcome. In the end, perhaps that was what mattered most, not where they came from or what barriers they faced, but that they chose to stay together through it all, that they built something real and lasting in a world that insisted it was impossible. When the rain met the fire, it created steam that rose to the heavens. And from that steam, something new was born, something that was neither rain nor fire, but completely unique. It was Leo and Amelia, fused in a union that transcended their individual natures. It was love in its purest and most transformative form, proving that even in the most unlikely places, magic can happen. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.